Hello, everyone. I'm Chenshuang Zhang, the postdoc from the AMILab. So for today's seminar, I'm glad to share one clear 2026 oral paper titled Learning to See Before Seeing, Demystifying Large Language Models Visual Powers from Language Pre-Training. This paper is from the Menta Superintelligence Lab at the University of Oxford. So before introduce this paper, I would like to share why I choose this paper. There are 4 reasons. The first one is actually there is a very compelling phenomenon that shows the large language models, despite being trained exclusively on their test, appear to develop their priors about the visual world. I think this phenomenon is very interesting. And actually, there are already many works investigating and reveal this phenomenon. But this paper, this clear paper, provides a systematic analysis on how these visual priors emerge during the language pre-training. And the third reason is that this paper provides a comprehensive experiments with more than 100 controlled experiments and 500,000 GPU hours under 16 benchmarks. And also, I think this paper provides many interesting insights, and I hope these insights can help inspire our own research topic. So let's go on to introduce this paper. The motivation of this paper is a compelling Pandora's. So the key finding is the large language models are trained on the test alone, but develop rich visual knowledge. So actually, as I said earlier, there are already many papers that reveal the similar finding from the 3 aspects. The first one is the programmatic vision. The second part is data efficient tuning. And the third one is the LLMs as the encoders. So I will introduce briefly about these 3 parts. The first part, the visual prior in large language models, the programmatic vision. So actually, a previous paper revealed that the large language models can generate a code that renders correct visual sense without seeing a single image. That means given a large language models, if we ask the models to draw some images with the test, we ask them to return the code to draw the images, and then compare them. We can find that interestingly, this code can draw the image we want them to draw, like a row of bicycles. So the second part is, if we do in a reverse order, we can find that given a human drawing, and we can ask the large language models, given a human drawing, we generate the related code, and we can ask the large language models, what does the following code generate? The large language models can output the correct category. And the third one is also interesting. Actually, we can ask the models to optimize its code to generate a better image. So actually, this kind of work reveal that the large language models have some understanding and prior about visual sense. The second part is about data efficient tuning. So I think many members are quite related to quite familiar with this figure. This is the very typical multi-model large model architecture. Actually, for example, for the models like Lava, when we want to create a multi-model large language models, a typical way to do it is to connect the pre-trained vision encoder and with a projection layer, and then map the vision tokens to the language token space. Then we can use the knowledge learned in the language models. So I hope to highlight one interesting phenomenon about this architecture is that actually the Lava model is trained on only about 60,000 unique images. So this is a quite relatively small set of image training set compared to the training set of the large language models. So we can get the conclusion that the high-level visual reasoning emerges from the small image test datasets when built on top of a strong large language models. So this is the second part. Let's move to the last part, the LLM as the encoders. So actually, there are branch work that use the large language models for the vision-only tasks. For example, in this figure, this is a traditional VIT vision large language vision models, vision transformers, and this work append the large language model transformer block, the frozen one, to the original vision encoder, and find that this can improve the vision accuracy. For example, the classification. So this is also interesting. This shows that the large language model itself can enhance their vision tasks without any language. So here is a summary. So there are three different branches of work that seems to investigate and reveal the same finding. The large language models are trained on text alone, but develop rich visual knowledge. So one interesting question emerges like, what do these findings indicate? So actually, this indicates a deeper principle of representation learning called planktonic representation hypothesis. In this hypothesis, the neural networks trained with different objectives on different data and modalities are converging to a shared statistical model of reality in the representation space. For example, this is a 3D world space, and we can find there is a red sphere next to a blue cone. So actually, to represent this space, we can either use to project it to a 2D image. We can also use it to within a text format to describe this thing. And based on the 2D image and text format, we can use either vision encoders or the text encoders to get the representation of the text and the vision space. So interestingly, this hypothesis has that highlight that although they are represented in the different modality, so the representation somehow converge to a point. So this hypothesis indicate that the text and image are different projections of the world, and a powerful model can learn the structure of the world from a single modality. So based on this hypothesis, one interesting question raises like, what derives this? How do the LLMs learn visual prior from the language pre-training? So this is what this clear paper does. This paper did a very systematic analysis of the visual prior in large language models. To summarize, this paper decomposed the visual priors into perception prior and the reasoning prior. And the second one is it treats the reasons. So where does this prior come from? It finds that the perception ability comes from a very broad web-based data training, and the reasoning ability comes from the training of the data like the code, math, and academia. And based on this finding, this paper built a recipe that specifically proposed a pre-training data mixing strategy for the vision-aware language pre-training. So let me introduce the experiment setup. Actually, in this paper produced more than 100 experiments with almost this unified experiment setup. Actually, it follows a very traditional two-stage pipeline to train a model. First, do the large language model pre-training, then do the multi-model large language pre-training with the tuning. First, about the large language model pre-training, actually the architecture is like using kind of Llama 3 style and the size ranges. And the training includes 16 sources like academia, biology, code, and so on, all the test-only data in this paper. And about the multi-modal large language tuning, it adopts the basic visual element with a MLP projector and use supervised fine-tuning. And for the evaluation, it evaluates under 16 benchmarks under 4 categories. For example, the general, knowledge, OCR, charge, vision-centric. So before moving on, let's have a look about all the evaluation benchmarks. And as shown in this figure, for the general part, so actually the questions are more diverse, like, is the dirty ground made of plastic? And for the knowledge, there are more scientific level questions in the knowledge type benchmarks. And the OCR and chart, there are some questions like what brand name is visible in the white text inside the green square. And the vision-centric task is more complex one, and for example, it asks the model to identify which one picture follows the same pattern established by the previous pictures. So this is a view of all the evaluation benchmarks. And based on the experiment setup and the benchmarks, let's move on to the key findings of this paper. So the first key finding, this paper investigate from the very typical data size, the pre-training data size, and also the model scale. And specifically for the setup, this paper trains the LLMs with the different model size and language pre-training data size, and then evaluate the multi-language models on their benchmarks we introduced before. And this specifically based on these results, the x-axis is the data size, and the y different lines indicates the model size. So let's come to the conclusion directly. We can find that for the different kind of benchmarks, it seems the different kind benchmarks achieves different trend. For example, for the general and knowledge benchmark, we can observe consistent gains like this, consistent gains with both the model size and the data clue of data value. And for the OCR and the chart benchmark, we can observe that this kind of benchmark are highly sensitive to the model size, but the data size does not matter so much. For the vision-centric task, we can find the large models can vary significantly from the model. For example, for the large models, it increases so significantly. But for the small models, not so much, increase so much with the data size increases. So from this experiment, actually, we can come to a conclusion that the different visual abilities have fundamentally different scaling laws. So after that, what we can do to further investigate the visual ability. So we can find that this paper moved to the second finding about the language data source. As we introduced earlier for the training data of the large language model, this paper includes 6 sources. So what does source mean? Each source like the code, the math, the art, and academia. These are 10 examples of the sources. So how about trained models with each of their language source? What that will give what this experiment can give us. So actually we find that interestingly, if the code data source leads over all the tasks, that means if we train only on the code type pre-training data, the model can achieve the best result. And another interesting finding is actually from all these results, the key insight that there seems to be 2 distinct clusters of the high-performing data. The first type is reasoning-centric, like code, math, and academia. And the second part can be visually described tests, such as the arts and food. In this type, the arts may introduce how the picture is look like. So it includes a lot of descriptive tests like the color, shape, and so on, this kind of attributes. So based on this investigation, we can find that the large language model training data source dramatically change which the visual ability emerges. That means different training data source can get different vision abilities. So in this part, we just train the models on each of the 16 data sources. So how about categorize them based on for example, the reasoning or the visual descriptive test? So actually in this paper, let's move to the third finding. In this type, actually this paper categorized the different 16 data sources into different reasoning or the visual types, then control the data proportion of each category for pre-training. That means the x-axis means the proportion, the ratio of this kind of data. Especially for the categorization, there are types like the code reasoning, the math reasoning, the science reasoning, and something else like the visual concept. So for example, for the visual concept, it includes the test that names the visual entities like the objects, people, places, and things. So in this experiment, we can get many interesting findings like more reasoning data progressively enhances the visual abilities. That means data like the code, math, and science. This kind of data can improve the accuracy a lot when the ratio of this kind of data increases. So on the other hand, we find that the small size of the visual rich test is crucial, but the performance, the accuracy stopped to increase at a very early level. So this is the second finding about the categorized language data source. So until now, we have discussed a lot about how can we control the ratio of the data source in the data level. So another level is the task level. So how can we derive a vision-aware training recipe? For example, some data source may derive some vision favorable accuracy improvement, but maybe some other data sources can improve the language favorable, for example, the proficiency of the language. So in this paper did a great research of the data source blends for the balanced model ability in this part. For example, as we move on, if we mix model language favorable data in the training data set, we can find that the language accuracy, the TACC and the PPL achieves the best result. But if we include more vision-aware data sets, the vision accuracy increases. So there is a balance among them between the data set and the accuracy on the different tasks. So in this paper, the authors provide a balanced recipe, the mix 6, this setting as a final recommendation. So this finding revealed that there is a trade-off. As the mixture becomes more reasoning-centric, the vision accuracy generally improves while the language proficiency steadily declines. So after that, what can we do further? Until now, we take the vision prior as a single entity. So it is just a vision. So can we to decompose it to the more fine-grained understanding? This paper proposed a new insight that decompose the vision priors to 2 different types of the priors. So actually, we can find that until now, we have done a lot of the experiments showing that different data scale or the different data source or the model scale that we have already done a lot of experiments. So we can just compute the correlation across the different model points and the accuracy of different tasks. And here is the correlation matrix. Interestingly, we find that there seems to be a distinct 2 independent skill clusters. For example, for the OCR and the general, the correlation is 1.37. And for the knowledge and vision, the correlation is 1.33. So while other correlations are relatively small. So in this case, this paper, the authors think that we can just further decompose the vision priors in 2 types, the perception prior and the reasoning prior. So actually, we can understand this decomposition from the task itself. So for example, for the perception prior, it includes the general tasks and also the OCR tasks. To answer these 2 kind of tasks, the models need to be good at the perception and do not need a lot of complex reasoning. But for the knowledge part and the vision-centric tasks, the model requires a very complex reasoning, and in that means the model needs more training of the reasoning data. So based on this part, the key conclusion is that the learned visual prior is not a single entity, but decomposes into at least a perception prior and a reasoning prior with different origins. So I think this finding is quite interesting and inspiring, because if we want to improve a task accuracy, we need to think which ability we should improve for the models. So this finding inspired us that if we want to if we want to improve the performance, like reasoning tasks, one simple way might be increase the reasoning data from the test format. So let's move on to the last finding. So until now, we just introduced the language pre-training using the language test only data. So one interesting might be, will their vision ability come from the visual instruction tuning? That means since when we train the multimodal large language models, we also include the test image paired for the visual instruction tuning. So actually, this paper answers this question by a very strictly designed experiment. They remove part of the perception and the reasoning data in the visual instruction tuning stage, as shown in this figure. Let's come to the conclusion directly. So here is the result. When we remove some perception data and evaluate on the perception tasks, we can find that there is a significant drop. That means the perception data in the visual tuning stage are quite important for the perception task. But if we remove the reasoning data, the influence is relatively small. On the other hand, when evaluated on the reasoning tasks, removing the perception data and both the perception data and the reasoning data achieve some modest drop. So actually, this results indicates us for the visual instruction tuning stage, the reasoning data seems not influence much to the final result. That means the visual reasoning preliminarily emerges from the language pre-training instead of the visual instruction tuning. So this is all findings introduced in this paper. So what can we do based on this finding? There is a small application of this findings introduced in this paper. Actually, since we have done a lot of experiments, more than 100 experiments, the authors did not use a very large token level. So how about if we extend or generalize the findings to a scaled up large token level experiment like the 1T tokens? And actually, this paper scale up and train a vision of very large language models using the different source of mixtures of the training data, and find that we can achieve a very balanced pre-training recipe that achieves the best results on both the language tasks and the vision tasks. So that's all introduced in this paper, and there are several takeaways. So the key point is the problem this paper investigates is the large language models are trained on the text alone, but develop rich visual knowledge. So there are actually 4 takeaways, I think. The first one is this paper introduced 2 distinct priors, different from the previous work that takes a vision ability as a whole. This paper could decompose it into a reasoning prior and a perception prior. So this is the first takeaway. The second takeaway is that the text-only reasoning data is the key engine. Actually, this kind of reasoning language data like the code, math, and academia significantly and reliably boost the visual reasoning. The third takeaway is that there are also other types of tests like the art or the food that include a lot of vision information and vision details. So a small number of these visually rich tests is necessary, but its benefit saturates quickly. So the last takeaway is actually based on these findings, this paper proposed a recipe that works to achieve a super performance on all the tasks. Specifically, this paper proposed we can create a balanced mixture of the text favorable and the vision favorable training data to achieve the occurrence improvement on all tasks. So that's all for this paper, and thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.